I just came back from a conference where I led a roundtable on Agile and innovation and was asked about forming an organization's Agile principles. Three different questions that I think are key to answering. And in this episode of the Driving Digital Stand-Up, I'm going to answer them for you and talk about what it takes to put together your organization's Agile principles. Hi, I'm Isaac Sacolick, and I'm the author of Digital Trailblazer. Welcome to this episode. Now, if you see me keynote or watch some of my other videos or read my books or blogs, you know I talk about self-organizing teams on two sides of a bookend. On one end are startups, really small, really fast, have few standards, can make mistakes, right? They have really the utmost self-organizing teams as they're figuring out their way of working. On the other hand, are enterprises, really old school enterprises with thick books of standards. We know that's really a way to stymie innovation and slow down teams. And most organizations that I know want to fit somewhere in between those two extremes. How do we enable and empower self-organizing teams? And how do we also create standards at the same time? In Digital Trailblazer, I leave 50 lessons at the end of all the chapters, a total of 50 in the book. And one of them is define your organization's Agile principles with easy to consume one-pagers. Here's an example of one. It comes from a blog post. What Agile teams can learn from first graders. You can see the URL to get access to this post. I will listen when someone is talking. I will raise my hand to talk. I will be nice. Really simple principles. And when you put these together on one page, they're easy to consume and easy to remember. And for most organizations, you're going to divide these up into different categories. So I'm going to share three questions that are going to help you answer three different aspects of principles that should go into your guidebook and help self-organizing teams innovate, but also create standards. All right, so here is question number one. How do we incorporate security into Agile? And it really exposes the tug of war that teams feel between the time they're spending on innovation and capabilities and the time they're spending on security, compliance, and all the things that make an application or a data pipeline robust. Okay, now when you think about security, it's really part of a bigger question. Experts. Those are people that have subject matter expertise in really key areas like user experience, like IT operations and architects, and like in data governance. They have a vested interest in how things are constructed. They want to make sure teams are following standards and good practices as they are building things. And typically, they are understaffed compared to the size of teams. So you might have 200 developers in 20 teams. You might only have 4 architects and maybe 3 people from InfoSec working with them. So we have to work through this imbalance of people to experts. How do we do this? Well, first, let's think about the team itself. There are certain times when the expert is a consultant to the team. They're weighing in on the non-functional criteria. They're weighing in on stories. They're looking at the releases and make sure they are release ready. Other times they may actually join the team and actually take on stories for the team by building a wireframe or doing a pen test. When the teams need an expert, the expert can come in and say, I'm going to join the team for this part of the sprint to actually do some work with you. Then you think about standards. Now, experts can't create standards in an ivory tower. They need to partner with their teams around us. What does that mean? It means coming up with standards that are usable, that they answer questions around them, that they can actually handle exceptions to any standards. And the way they do this is by creating a book of non-functional criteria. If I'm building a data visualization, I'm going to go to the non-functional criteria that tells me how I use bar charts, where I use certain colors, what goes on different parts of the layout. That is a user experience set of non-functional criteria. If I'm building a form that's taking in security information, PII information, there should be security non-functional criteria that I can import into my story so that my teams know exactly what the security requirements are. So what do experts do? They are on teams, they're off teams as consultants, but most importantly, they're building this book of non-functional criteria, and that becomes key to the principles that go into incorporating experts like security into Agile. Let's go on to question 2. So here's question number 2. How can a small org experience the benefits of Agile without the rigor? Now, the first thing I'm going to say is there's rigor to Scrum, there's rigor to Agile. It doesn't come for free, right? Just like the teams that you see here, they have to build up their muscle. They have to find ways to collaborate together. This is part of what we're trying to figure out is what's the best way for a particular team to collaborate. When you think of a wider organization, what you're really thinking about is how is a group of smaller organizations who are working together work as a team. Now, this is not like crew and not like cycling on a track because we're not doing things linear, right? When I think about sports and what collaboration is like for Agile teams, I think more like hockey and baseball. In baseball, we have technology that's a factor in terms of how teams are operating. We have finances that in terms of who can we put on a team, right? So if I have a small ballpark like Yankee Stadium, I want some home run hitters who can hit it out to right field, right? I'm going to form my team based on that. I'm also going to look at my existing squad every single year and say, who do I need to add to my team so that they are better, faster, smarter, and have the capabilities for me to win a championship. Same thing goes in hockey. There's lots of different styles to forming your hockey team. There are fast styles. There are those that are playing the trap, right? These are different ways that teams are collaborating in this sport and finding ways to win. So when I think about small orgs, I'm really thinking about the makeup of the team and how do we make the team successful based on their skills, their capabilities, and where they're coming from, their diversity. Okay, so 5 different things you should think about when you're forming Agile in an Agile team. What are the Scrum basics? It's really hard to get away from things like really well-run stand-ups, really run reviews, retrospectives, really home in on the basics. Make sure that teams are doing that well. Define roles, in organizations. Product owners, business analysts, scrum masters, tech leads, QA leads. A large organization may be able to afford all 5 independent leads. In smaller organizations, you might find a product owner that's also a business analyst, or at times even a tech lead performing the role of a product owner. So be nimble about how you're defining your roles because you're going to have different situations. Create shared terminology. I'm going to accent this in the third question, but people come in and have different notions of what a sprint review is and what goes into a retrospective. So make sure there's a shared understanding. Simplify your tools, right? If you go into Jira software and you're configuring what goes into your user story, you may be taking fields out and simplifying what you're asking of people before you put new fields in. And then think about incremental training. And what that basically means is start with the basics, make sure it's being done really well, make sure teams are following a common way of doing things, and then add to it. So maybe you start with story writing, and then you add estimation, and then you add release planning. If you work with me on Center of Excellence programs, that's essentially how we work, is finding the gaps in how teams are operating and illustrating to them how do we learn 2 or 3 new practices over a couple month time that become a standard for your organization. So how can we win with small organizations? It's by starting small, coming up with the standards and principles for small teams, and then expanding around that. So here's the money question. How do we become an Agile organization when everyone has a different vision of what it means to be Agile and how to practice it? Now, when I started Agile 15 years ago, we had people coming over into Agile and Scrum teams who had never followed a regimented process or had come from Waterfall, and we were unwinding Waterfall belief systems into Agile mindsets. Today, you can see here from the 15th State of Agile report that came out last year in 2021, just the number of different frameworks that people have come from. So if you have 100 people or 200 people in your organization, chances are 4 or 5 of these different frameworks were being used at their prior employers. They're coming in with different preconceived notions of what Scrum means, what Agile means, how to quote unquote scale Agile, what Agile mindsets and cultures are. They're using different tools. You can see here just the plethora of tools that are being used across different organizations and teams. And they're coming in with different certifications in subject areas. You really have a Tower of Babel when you look at an entire organization-wide set of teams and saying, how do we want to practice Agile? What is our Agile way of working? This is the most important thing I think teams and organizational leaders need to think today. Your organizations are all different, right? You should learn from experts, but you'll want to empower your guides, people I call digital trailblazers, to figure out your Agile way of working. Okay, and that means that you're going to take the best practices and say what makes sense in your team. Maybe you have Scrum Masters, maybe you have Scrum Facilitators, or maybe you don't have Scrum Master facilitators at all, and you're divvying up those responsibilities across teams. Maybe you're going to estimate on a 6-point Fibonacci sequence scale of points. Maybe you're not going to estimate at all. You're a smaller organization, you're working on something that's truly innovative. You don't need estimating for that particular team. Okay, so lots of different ways to figure out what Agile means in your organization. I talk more about this in this week's blog post that you can get access to, starcio.com/agile-3-questions. I hope you will read that post because I share some secrets about my book, Digital Trailblazer. And I hope you'll subscribe to my newsletter. My newsletter is the best way to get access to all my content. I publish about 10 to 14 articles every week, every month, about 2 videos every month. If you subscribe with that, I'm going to be sending you some best practices. And there you have the URL, starcio.com/DDS/EP58. Thank you for joining this week's episode of the Driving Digital Stand Up, and I look forward to seeing you at future episodes. Have a great day.